It was closer to war than the world was willing to admit. In the early hours before dawn, massive oil tankers eased away from Venezuelan ports. No sirens, no announcements, just steel hulls cutting through dark water. These ships were sanctioned, blacklisted, officially not supposed to move at all. And yet they were moving. Loaded with crude oil, they sailed directly into waters the United States had declared off-limits. This was not an accident, it was a test, because when a superpower announces a blockade, the assumption is simple. Nothing gets through. No ships, no trade, no defiance. But history has a habit of breaking assumptions, and the moment those tankers crossed into open sea, the world entered a dangerous what-if scenario. What if sanctioned tankers could simply run a U.S. blockade? What if the enforcement of global power was no longer absolute? The blockade itself was announced as a decisive act. Washington framed it as enforcement of sanctions, a necessary step to cut off Venezuela's oil revenues and force political change. On paper, it sounded controlled, legal, precise. Naval patrols would monitor key routes. Sanctioned vessels would be intercepted. Oil exports would stop. But the ocean does not respect press releases. It respects physics, distance, and time. Venezuela's economy depended on oil. Strip that away and the country would suffocate financially. That was the logic. But oil is not just a commodity. It is infrastructure. It is momentum. It is ships already loaded, contracts already signed, crews already at sea. And when the blockade took effect, several tankers were already positioned to move. They left port quietly, some under flags of convenience, some under names that would soon disappear from registries. Once they cleared Venezuelan waters, something else happened. Tracking signals went dark. Automatic identification systems required for maritime safety were switched off. Other vessels broadcast false locations appearing hundreds of miles away from where they actually were. On radar screens, they became ghosts. This was not new. Shadow fleets had existed for years, quietly moving sanctioned oil from Iran, Russia, and Venezuela. What was new was the scale of confrontation. This time, the United States had declared that these ships would not be allowed to sail. And yet they did. Historically, blockades were blunt instruments. During the World Wars, naval blockades starved entire nations. Ships were sunk. Ports were sealed. The line between enforcement and war was unmistakable. But modern blockades exist in a gray zone. They are enforced through sanctions courts and selective seizures. Warships are present, but weapons stay silent. The goal is pressure without escalation. That balance became fragile the moment the tankers ran. On the open sea, jurisdiction blurs. International waters belong to no one and everyone at the same time. A sanctioned tanker moving through those waters challenges not just U.S. policy, but the mechanics of global law itself. Intercept too aggressively, and it looks like piracy. Do nothing, and the blockade collapses. The response was not immediate force, it was pursuit. Intelligence agencies began tracking satellite imagery. Maritime analysts reconstructed ship movements from partial signals. Patrol aircraft scanned the Atlantic. What followed was less like a naval battle and more like a global manhunt. One tanker changed its name mid-voyage. Another repainted its hull markings. Routes zigzagged unpredictably. The ships were buying time. But time works both ways. After weeks at sea, one of the tankers was finally intercepted thousands of miles from Venezuela. Not near the Caribbean, not near South America, but near the North Atlantic close to Europe. The message was unmistakable. Running the blockade did not mean escaping it. It meant turning the entire ocean into a pursuit zone. When U.S. forces boarded the vessel under federal warrant, the moment sent shockwaves through maritime and diplomatic circles. This was not just enforcement near Venezuela. This was global reach. Any sanctioned tanker anywhere could now be seized. Other vessels were intercepted closer to home. Crews detained. Cargoes frozen. Legal battles began immediately. Who had authority? Which laws applied? Was this enforcement or overreach? Allies watched carefully. Rivals watched even more closely. Behind every intercepted tanker was a quieter consequence. Insurance markets began to freeze. Shipping companies quietly withdrew coverage. Crews hesitated to sign contracts that might turn into floating prisons. Ports questioned whether accepting certain vessels could trigger retaliation. Slowly, almost invisibly, fear became another tool of enforcement, not announced, not legislated, but deeply felt across the global maritime system. Russia condemned the seizures as illegal. China warned against destabilizing maritime norms. Smaller nations worried about precedent. Because if one country could enforce sanctions globally through naval seizures, the balance of power at sea was shifting. Inside Venezuela, the impact was brutal. Oil exports slowed dramatically. Revenue collapsed. Inflation surged. Power shortages worsened. The blockade did what it was designed to do economically. But politically, the picture was murkier. Pressure did not immediately translate into surrender. Instead, it hardened positions and pushed trade further into the shadows. Meanwhile, global oil markets adapted. Prices fluctuated but did not explode. Other suppliers filled gaps. Tankers rerouted. Traders adjusted. The world proved once again that energy systems bend rather than break. Oil kept flowing, just not always openly. What this episode revealed was not the strength or weakness of any single country. It revealed something deeper. Power in the modern world is no longer about absolute control. It is about friction. How much resistance can be applied before systems adapt? How far enforcement can stretch before it reshapes global behavior? The tankers that ran the blockade did not win. Many were seized. Some turned back. Others disappeared into legal limbo. But they changed the equation. They showed that even under the weight of sanctions, commerce looks for cracks, and the ocean provides many. This was not just a clash between Venezuela and the United States. It was a preview of a future where sanctions shipping and sovereignty collide more frequently, where shadow fleets grow more sophisticated, where enforcement becomes more global and resistance more elusive. A blockade once meant silence at sea, empty horizons, still water. Today it means pursuit tracking algorithms, court orders, and ships that refuse to stop moving. And that leaves one final question hanging over the water. If a handful of sanctioned tankers could challenge a blockade and force a global response, what happens when dozens do? When entire fleets move in coordination? When enforcement itself becomes overstretched because the sea has not chosen a side, and the next what if may already be leaving port?